Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting, and my guest today is Amanda Wilkie. Amanda, thank you for being on the podcast.
Hey, Jon. Always great to be here with you.
Amanda is one of our technology and process consultants. And, as you work with firms in this area of creating processes, especially over the last couple of years, you've had the extra lens or the extra nuance or the extra kind of perspective of, well, how do we create one firm processes in a remote and hybrid work environment? So I want to ask you first, talk a little bit about the importance. If there's a firm out there listening to the podcast and they have multiple offices, maybe they got a hybrid situation, they're growing their remote team, speak about why it's so important that they have one firm processes.
Yeah. Well, Jon, we have seen things change the last couple of years on many levels, not just within firms, within Boomer, but on many levels, things have changed over the last few years. And as you mentioned, we used to really look at, okay, what process do we need to build, or how do we need to build a process that is going to support like a multi-office firm? And then of course 2020 happened. We all know what happened there. And all of a sudden many firms were 100% remote, or the majority of their staff were remote. And then we were also interacting with our clients in a more remote fashion as well. They weren't coming into the office as much. We were doing, video calls instead of in-person meetings, things like that. So many firms had to adjust their processes and to accommodate that type of interaction. And then now that things are settling down a bit and we're going into that, new normal, next normal, whatever you want to call it, we're not going back to the old way that things were, but firms are starting to come back into the office, and then they're thinking, oh, great, we can just go back to the way that we used to do things. Well, not necessarily, because now you have the challenge of not only those multiple offices, but you have those remote workers and you have those hybrid workers. So what we're starting to see are firms trying to re-implement their old processes that they used when everyone was in the office. And it's really missing the mark. Some people being in the office, some people being hybrid or remote, it doesn't work the same. We've heard stories of, well, there's no point in me going into the office because all I do is I go in the office and I sit on Zoom all day because other people are remote. So there's no point. So they don't want to go into the office. So again, just to kind of recap that, you're starting to see the processes break down and you're starting to see challenges in the processes because we're not going back to the way things used to be. We are now settling into a permanent remote or hybrid type of situation. So that's why it's very important, and a lot of firms are focusing on process improvement right now, and it's a different focus than it was 3 or 5 years ago.
No, that's great. And before I ask you kind of where firms should begin or how they should kind of think about improving those processes, let's talk a little bit about kind of what pain maybe firms are experiencing due to the lack of some of those processes. So as you work with firms, what are some of the pain points that you see them experiencing due to the fact that they don't have this quite figured out?
Yeah. You see it in a few different ways. A big one right now is really the employee experience and staff engagement and client communication. How do we hand things off to the client? How do we communicate with them? How do we hand things off to remote workers and get those things back? Because again, if you used to have paper moving around the office, people aren't coming into the office. If you used to have clients drop papers off and they didn't do that for a couple of years, and now they've gone back to the old way and they're dropping papers off, then that's not a good experience for your remote workers. So you can see a lot of the pain points in the staff morale, staff experience, and also the pain points in handing off work and how work actually moves around. From kind of a firm leadership perspective, you also see some problems with kind of insight and accountability, insight to where the work is, who's working on it, how long it's been sitting there, how it's moving forward. So it's similar pain points that we saw with multi-office firms trying to figure out processes, with just a little bit of a different challenge. Multi-office firms a few years ago, they were focused on process improvement because they really wanted to be able to share resources. That was one of the main focuses. Now, it's not just sharing the resources, but it's leveraging the resources that you have, no matter where those resources are.
Excellent answer, Amanda. And if I could point something out that I think won't be or will be obvious to you, but I want to point it out for our listeners too, is that entire answer you just gave. Not once did you talk about efficiency there, right? In
No.
the sense of, oh, to be more efficient. You were talking about employee experience, client experience. You were talking about the sharing of resources. You were, there's so many benefits beyond, above, however you want to word that, efficiency for efficiency's sake. And so I love your answer there.
Well, and John, you can only be so efficient. And a lot of firms, again, if they focused on process the last few years, they became pretty efficient. Your employees can only be so efficient. What the challenge is, you can't get more time in the day. And your employees, their outlook is changing. They don't necessarily want to work those, 50, 60-hour weeks. So how can you improve your processes that's going to build the capacity so that they can be engaged, they can service the clients the way that your clients deserve, but you're also not killing your employees along the way?
Yeah, that's great. So where should firms start, right? Sometimes this could kind of be an overwhelming kind of feeling. It's like, okay, we know we need to do this. We could probably list out on a whiteboard all the issues we have or all the opportunities we have, but how do we actually start this?
Yeah. So, John, and our philosophy here at Boomer is that, process improvement is something that we do. It's not something that we did. So it's not just we're going to do a process improvement engagement, or we're going to do a process improvement project with a firm and check the box and call it good. Firms are really looking at all of their processes. So a lot of firms start with the compliance-related processes when we think about processes for client service. So things like tax, things like audit, because they want to be able to provide those services, but they want to build the capacity to provide other services, more value-add services to their clients. We're also seeing firms really focus on internal processes. So how do we improve the billing process? How do we improve employee onboarding in a remote environment? If you've got a new employee that's 100% remote, that's going to be different how you onboard them and engage them and create a positive first impression and experience for them. It's going to be different than someone who would coming into the office. Same with client onboarding. There's so many internal teams and resources that are part of those processes that there's a lot of opportunity there. So, John, that's a long-winded answer to say there's no wrong place to start. There's no particular, here's the best process to start with. I would say actually, look at all of your processes and prioritize which ones you want to start with. Do you feel a lot of pain around, say, your 1040 process? Do you feel a lot of pain around your employee onboarding process? So that can be a little bit subjective, but there's no wrong place to start. Just go into it knowing that that is your starting point, and you're going to need to continue to do process improvement along the way. After you've decided that, John, I recommend that firms make sure that they're looking at the entire process. So many times we'll talk to firms and they'll say, oh, well, we feel like, we could really use our administrative professionals differently. And we have issues just in this part of our process. If you look at just a phase of your process, you're going to end up, fixing some things, but you could be creating bottlenecks somewhere else in the process. So my advice to firms is, come up with a list of processes that you want to tackle, and then make sure that you are creating a cross-functional team of people who are involved in that process every phase of that process, all along the way. That's going to really be the way to get the most improvement in those processes.
Yeah. And so no matter where they start, right? No matter where they identify their kind of biggest opportunity, biggest pain point, however you want to word that, and they know that that's their starting point and it's a continuous improvement process. Can you speak a little bit about how no matter where they start, kind of understanding a few key things, which I believe are covered in what you call the project charter, in the sense of why are we even interested in changing this process, or what are some of the why is this better, some of those things. So no
Mm,
matter where they start, could you speak just at a high level, because I know we could spend all
yeah.
day on the project charter, but just at a high level, can you speak about some of the key components that these teams need to be able to communicate, well, first understand, but then be able to communicate to the rest of the team and firm about why?
Yeah. And you're right. If you get me going, John, we could be here all day talking about some of these things. Um, but I think it's important what you want to do is you actually want to empower that team. You've selected a cross-functional team. They all bring value to the team. You want to make sure that you have empowered them to make changes, because as a firm leader, you may not be in the weeds in those processes. So you want to give the people who are actually doing the work that authority to make those changes. Now, what you're talking about with our project charter, every project, every process improvement project should have a charter, and the team needs to define what is the scope. So what does the process look like? What is the beginning and the end of our process? You want to define what the team is wanting to accomplish. That's why I said you need to give the team the authority to actually take this on and make those decisions. You don't, as a firm leader, you don't want to go in there and say, I want to see X, Y, Z. The team knows the pain points. See what the team wants to accomplish through this project. It could be, higher staff morale. It could be better client experience. It could be leveraging technology better. But the team needs to define that. And then they need to define the success criteria. How do they know they've actually accomplished those objectives? And then this is very important, because some of those, the success criteria could be subjective. Some of them it could be easily measured. But once you understand what your objectives are and the success criteria, you want to really dive into, how are we going to measure these things? How are we going to be able to prove that we hit our objectives? So those are some of the things that we really recommend doing early on, like before you even get started in process improvement. And then, John, you also mentioned our 2 why questions, and that's why do we need to change, and why will this be better? That's what we always focus on. That's where the buy-in really starts. You start to build buy-in throughout the firm when you can proactively answer those questions. Why do we need to change, and why will this be better? Some of it may seem obvious. A lot of it isn't obvious. It may be obvious to the person closest to that part of the process, but documenting the entire process, looking at that success criteria, and then asking, why do we need to change, and why will this be better? If you can proactively answer those questions, John, you're going to have a successful project.
That's great. And Amanda, I spend a lot of my time with firms in the area of growth, marketing, messaging, things of that sort. And one thing I really love about those 2 why questions is everyone on the team needs to have those answers memorized, and they need to be able to say it on demand, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of similarities in terms of marketing messaging, in the sense that, hey, we have to be able to real clearly state in a repeatable way exactly why, the value is there as it relates to whatever we're promoting. So as it relates to this process improvement methodology, I think that's just huge. So I love that y'all include that in the project charter, and that's just a central part
Yeah.
of.
I mean, let's face it, John, change is hard. No matter who you are, no matter what level of the firm you are in, change is really hard. And naturally, we push back. We think about what's in this for me. How is this going to impact my daily life? How's it going to impact the way that I do my job? And so if you can proactively answer those questions, people will be bought into to change. They will be bought into new processes a lot faster.
Yeah. So, Amanda, as we finish up this episode here, if someone was interested in saying, okay, listening to this podcast has really inspired me to actually get the ball moving in this area within my firm, what's the first thing you would recommend they do?
Um, John, I think one thing that we're seeing in a lot of firms is they're actually identifying someone who is passionate about process improvement. So we're starting to see a lot of firms create roles around process management, process improvement, and because you need someone who's really passionate and be able to really move these projects forward. So identifying that person is a great first step. And then, of course, I'll always say it, John, they can always reach out to us and talk to us here at Boomer, because we know what other firms are doing. We can help connect them with other firms that have been successful. We can help them through process improvement as well.
That's great. And I think to summarize kind of that first next step is that who, not how, right? Finding the right who, so they can help execute on the how. If you have the right how, but you don't have the right who, right? Someone that doesn't have that passion around it. So I love your advice there. All right. Well, Amanda, this concludes our episode today. As always, thank you for a great conversation. And for our listeners, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. So if you enjoyed the conversation Amanda and I just had, please know that we release new episodes every Tuesday morning, and we like to change up the topics. But the common theme among those topics is they are all critical to your firm's success. So please go ahead and subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks so much. And thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, John.